Hey guys, this is Newt and you're listening to the Off Cooldown podcast. I'm joined by Cal and Q. Say hi guys!
Hello.
Hello.
Tonight's episode will be our second Upkeep, where we keep up with the latest news and trends in the gaming industry. And tonight's episode will be all about the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is an upcoming handheld gaming computer by Valve Corporation, the creators of big successes such as CSGO, Dota 2, Portal, and Half-Life, as well as the big failures such as Artifact, Steam Machine, and the Steam Controller. The Steam Deck first came into the public sphere as the rumored Steam PAL, which emerged back in May. It was officially unveiled 2 weeks ago on July 15 as the Steam Deck, and it's expected to ship to the US, Canada, EU, and the UK this holiday 2021. But due to high demand, reserving one today might mean getting your Steam Deck next year, as late as Q3 2022. TLDR, the Steam Deck is like a Nintendo Switch Lite that runs on Linux and can run PC games and applications. Today, we're going to talk about the Steam Deck, the history of Valve's hardware, its hardware specs, and comparison against other handhelds, such as, naturally, the Nintendo Switch OLED. So expect discussions today to get a little bit technical. First off, the history of Valve's hardware. For this topic, Q is here to educate us. So, take the floor, Q.
Okay, so Steam has had a pretty short but very storied history with hardware. It all started around November 2015 when they released the Steam Machine alongside the Steam Link. So both of these were absolute commercial failures. The idea behind one of them, the Steam Machines, was to create Steam's own console running their own proprietary OS after Gabe Newell called, quote, Windows 8 a catastrophe for everyone in the PC space. They didn't sell. The Steam Machine and the Steam Link both were discontinued in November 2018. However, the Steam Link kind of lived on in the software side, and it became what we now know as Remote Play Together, so that was a pretty important part of Steam's history. And then, of course, there was a Steam Controller, which was also released alongside these two, but it lived a little bit longer, surviving all the way until 2019 before it was discontinued. And then in 2020, the Steam Controller caused Valve to receive a lawsuit from something called Ironburg Inventions because of the hair triggers that they were using at the back of the controller. Were apparently patented by Ironburg Inventions, and Valve lost this lawsuit. And since then, they hadn't touched anything new with hardware until now. So, the Steam Deck is, as Newt mentioned earlier, it's a portable PC that will play your entire cast of Steam library, as well as a couple of other games. When prompted about it, I know that Valve said that they would actually actively support the Epic Games Store running in their native Steam OS. And yeah, what is it exactly? Let's get a bit more into the hardware side of things. So, the Steam Deck is a relatively large console compared to the other handhelds on the market today, at least compared to its main competitor, the Switch. While they both share a 7-inch screen, and both of them run natively on that screen at around 720p, though the Steam Deck runs at 1280 by 800, which is a 16 by 10 resolution. The Steam Deck kind of seems to have larger controllers on the side because of their preferred button layout. It features all of the buttons that you would normally find. You have the 2 analog sticks, you have the D-pad, you have the face buttons, the 2 bumpers, the 2 triggers, but notably, the Steam controller also features 4 hair triggers at the back, and its main feature are the 2 major two trackpads, which act as a sort of mouse. This kind of technology we already saw on their Steam controller that was released in 2015. The Steam Deck will supposedly weigh around 600, something around the 670 gram mark, which is a lot heavier than the Switch's like 350 grams or something like that, and significantly heavier than the Switch Lite's 270 or 280 grams.
So actually, if you were feeling, if you thought that the Switch was heavy in handheld, like my brother does, you'd probably find this even heavier and like impractical to play on handheld. Or like if you're lying on bed and playing right before you sleep, you might be having a hard time with it, right?
Yeah, imagine Like, you know how sometimes when you're lying in bed and you're typing on your phone and it falls on your face because you fall asleep. Imagine something that weighs half a kilogram, a little bit more than half a kilogram, just landing flat on your face. That'd be pretty painful. Yeah, it's a bit on the heavier side, but understandably so, because it's a lot more powerful than the Switch. So let's take a look at what's under the hood. The Steam Deck will run a custom AMD or a semi-custom AMD APU. An APU is just a fancy way of saying that it is both a CPU and a GPU put together. Normally on computers, you have most computers will be running a CPU that does all the computing power and all the processing, and then you have the GPU that handles the graphics side of things. An APU combines both of these into one more elegant, simpler, and weaker package. It will be running AMD's Zen 2 CPU architecture, which was released in 2019. You're going to find that same architecture on like the Ryzen 3000 series for desktops or the Ryzen 4000 series, which are a brand of APUs. But notably, the GPU that it's going to be running, unlike the desktop version of Zen 2, which runs with Vega GPU, this one will be running RDNA 2, which is AMD's current latest graphical architecture. It's the one that you find in the Ryzen 6000. I mean, not in the Ryzen. It's the one you find in the Radeon 6000 series, their highest end RT line of graphics cards. And notably, this combo of the RDNA 2 and the Zen 2 architecture is also what you find in the PS5, the Xbox Series X, and the Xbox Series S. Albeit the Steam Deck's version of it is a lot more toned down for a mobile platform. The Steam Deck will also be featuring 16 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM, which is kind of a big deal. Having good memory bandwidth for an APU matters a whole lot for its performance because unlike the CPU and GPU being discrete from one another where they have separate memory, APU draws all of its memory from the system memory. So having quad-channel LPDDR5, which is, in layman's terms, it's fast, it would be really helpful for pushing the performance of the Steam Deck to keep up with its competitors. And as for storage, right, there's going to be 3 different distinct models that the Steam Deck is going to feature with different storage options. I think Cal can elaborate on this one a bit more.
Alright, so the Valve Steam Deck will be coming in 3 different versions. The base version, going for $399 USD, features 64 gigabytes of eMMC storage. The next tier is $529 and has 256 gigabytes of storage, but it uses an NVMe SSD, so it's much faster than the base model. And then finally, the top-end version is $649, and it will feature 512 gigabytes of NVMe SSD storage. So, all 3 versions have the same specs except for their storage, and the base version is the only one that isn't running on a SSD.
So that can actually be a pretty big deal for something like the Steam Deck, because eMMC means embedded multimedia card storage, and you can think of it as just like having a memory card, having an SD card permanently inside of your machine. That is significantly slower than NVMe SSDs because of the way that the way that SSDs, specifically NVMe SSDs, interface with your CPU and your GPU. The only other notable changes between these 3 different types of Steam Deck are the things that come along with it. In the case of the 256 gig version that costs $130 more than the base version, it comes with an exclusive carrying case and a Steam Community Profile bundle. And then if you pay an extra, $120 on top of that, not only do you get bigger storage, you also get what Valve calls premium anti-glare etched glass, the same exclusive carrying case, a Steam Profile bundle similar to the previous version, and this one comes with an exclusive keyboard theme. So Valve's still out here pushing, software transactions and even into the physical product. I don't know how to feel about this, but I feel like we're only really paying for the storage, and the rest of it is just sort of tacked on there to make it feel like they're providing more.
Yeah,
That's
they just
exactly how it feels.
they just really needed more bullet points there. That's why they added those. I think the exclusive Steam community stuff that nobody probably cares about. But yeah, I think running the 64 gigabyte version almost has the same architecture in terms of storage as the Nintendo Switch, but if you go with the 256 gigabyte and the 512 gigabyte version, which runs an NVMe SSD internal storage, that eliminates a lot of loading times, right? If I'm correct, most modern PCs run with NVMe SSD, and I think the PS5 and the Xbox Series X also makes use of their own versions of SSDs that actually eliminates a lot of loading time in first party titles exclusive to those consoles.
Well, yes, on one hand, that most PCs these days use one of two kinds of SSDs, the SATA SSDs and the NVMe SSDs. The main difference being that NVMe SSDs are connected directly to your motherboard without the cabling in a PCIe slot, which is the same kind of slot used by your graphics card. So it's technically faster, although in testing, people can't really tell that big of a difference between SATA SSDs and NVMe ones. And in the case of the PS5 and the Xbox Series consoles, yes, they are using SSDs, NVMe SSDs, and these ones are particularly optimized to have very short loading times. I remember PS5 had a technical presentation before where they mentioned specifically how much work they put into being able to reduce loading times by by just speeding up the interfacing between their storage and their processing.
And I think if 256 gigabytes, 64 gigabytes, or 512 gigabytes aren't enough for you, for example, if you're playing Warzone, which, their updates sometimes go ahead more than 100 gigabytes storage, you can also upgrade the storage of these Steam Deck consoles or handhelds, but there's no way of upgrading the SSD or the internal storage, but you can buy or purchase any kind of SD cards, slot it in, and install the games there, which will result to longer loading times, but I think it's a very good compromise if you want extra memory or storage for your Steam Deck. But yeah, it's actually kind of like disappointing that there's no way for us to upgrade the internal hardware of the Steam Deck. So most probably in the future, probably 3 or 5 years ahead, if Steam Deck was successful, we might see a Steam Deck 2 or something down the line.
Well, we're actually not too sure whether or not we're allowed to upgrade the hardware of it, because something that I saw from a video by Gamers Nexus on their in-depth look on the Steam Deck is that there are actually screw holes on the back of the Steam Deck. So unlike many other consoles, it looks like you can actually open this up without actually, having to tear into the plastic frame of it, the plastic shell. So it remains to be seen whether or not, maybe with a little bit of tampering, hopefully in a way that Valve wouldn't have you void your warranty for, maybe you could actually upgrade the SSD that's inside of the machine. And on the note of micro SD cards being expandable storage, it does have that, similar to the Switch, but the main problem I think that you might face with it is the fact that there's so many different kinds of SD cards, and with all of them have a bunch of different speeds. So if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you might get the slower ones. You will definitely notice the longer loading times, and it may also cause problems with some games, because unlike the Nintendo Switch, where all of the games are developed specifically for that console, the Steam Deck kind of just runs. It's basically a PC, so it comes with all the in and outs of the flexibility of having a PC. That being, there's no one size fits all solution for all the different games that run on PCs. And speaking of that, the different games that run on PCs, the software that the Steam Deck is going to be shipping with is Valve's custom SteamOS 3.0. The older versions of the Steam machines that came out in 2015 to 2018 were running older versions of SteamOS 1.0 and 2.0, and they're all all three of them are based on Linux, and that could cause some problems overall, because for one thing, not all games support Linux natively, and even if the roster of games that do support it is slowly growing, that still puts you behind so much of the games that you can actually play. Although there's a solution to that called a compatibility layer, where Linux will basically, I don't exactly know the exact details behind it, but basically Linux will be able to run Windows applications through the help of this compatibility layer. But I've heard that compatibility layers always cause problems with performance and optimization, because there's only so much you can do. So on the software side, to help the hardware communicate better with the software, especially if the software was developed for Windows and not for Linux. But Valve says that SteamOS is, quote, built with Steam Deck in mind and optimized for a handheld gaming experience. It comes with Proton, a compatibility layer that makes it possible to run your games without any porting work needed from developers. For Deck, we're vastly improving Proton's game compatibility and support for anti-cheat solutions by working directly with developers. End quote. But also in their FAQ, in the developer FAQ, they mentioned that non-Valve anti-cheat software doesn't work right now. So EAC, BattleEye, and all those other things, they just don't work, which means that you're going to be limited right now, at least. We're still a couple of months off from release. So right now, at least, there are a bunch of games you might not even be able to play because of the anti-cheat software being unavailable for it.
Yeah, actually, I saw a post or an article about it saying that off the Steam charts, the top 10 games that have the highest daily active users, I think 4 out of 10 of them can't be played on Steam Deck natively. You have Apex Legends, which runs its own anti-cheat software through EA's proprietary software. You also have PUBG, which won't run natively on the Steam Deck. So there's a lot of different games, mostly third-party titles of Valve that won't run natively on the Steam Deck. But there's actually a more elegant solution to it if you're more techie, which is you could just uninstall the Steam OS and just install Windows on the Steam Deck, which I think that Valve actually encourages for people using Steam Deck to do.
They did mention that they wanted to give users the flexibility of just having, it's basically a pocket PC. So you could install Windows, you could install an OS of your choice. But they also explicitly mentioned when asked about it that the Epic Game Store would also be supported, like by the Steam Deck natively. So you're not limited only to Steam games. So on the side of it being a pocket PC, something that I forgot to mention earlier is the docking feature. Similarly to the Nintendo Switch, the Steam Deck will have the ability to be docked and be used as a regular PC with a full desktop. It can work with a monitor, and Valve claims that when it's docked, it can play. You can run up to 8K resolution at 60 frames per second, or 4K resolution at 120 hertz, 120 frames per second. So that's a pretty big claim for such a small device. And while I do understand that the technology is probably there for it to do that, I highly doubt you'll actually be able to play any of your games, at that resolution and at that frame rate, considering the hardware of the Steam Deck. So far, the only game journalists that have got their hands on a Steam Deck was IGN, and they said that supposedly the Steam Deck was capable of playing Jedi Fallen Order, like Respawn's Jedi Fallen Order, at high settings and what looked to be like around 30 FPS. So that kind of makes it comparable supposedly to a PS4, not a PS4 Pro, but a PS4. And they also claim that it could keep pace with next-gen consoles, or what they would call next-gen consoles, which are the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. And it seems like a pretty big claim for such a small console. I don't know if it's doing Valve any favors with them doing that.
And I think not a lot of software actually natively supports 8K resolution at this point. So I think at least for the current time that we are in, it's just future-proofing to claim that you can do 8K resolution at 60 FPS. Although that's a very nice feature to have, if you have like an 8K monitor or 8K TV lying around, and knowing that you can dock the Steam there and play at glorious 8K HD graphics. I actually can't relate because I haven't played in UHD ever, but that would be really neat, right? And then right now, the Steam Deck doesn't ship. It's worth noting that the Steam Deck doesn't ship with the docking port right now, unlike the Nintendo Switch, which comes in the box. Right now, the only way you can do this by using third-party docking devices. Those things that can convert, or like USB extender, something like that, which you can connect via USB-C to your Steam Deck, and then has ports for HDMI and other USB cables. But the Steam Deck's dock will be sold separately somewhere down the line. I'm not sure about the timeline when Valve is intending.
They didn't mention.
They didn't mention it.
they haven't mentioned anything about the dock other than that it
Yeah.
exists, and
Other
they
than
showed
the
us. Yeah, they showed like a small diagram of the ports that it's gonna have. So it's gonna have a one USB-C in, and then it's going to have a display port and an HDMI out. It's gonna have Ethernet, 3 USB ports, and another USB-C. And you don't need to have the dock to turn your Steam Deck into a PC. Like, you can just have a regular USB-C connection to do that. But yeah, no announcement on the dock at all. We just know that it's gonna exist at some point, but we know nothing about it as of right now.
Well,
So
we've compared the Steam Deck to the Nintendo Switch a lot, at least tangentially. But before we get to the nitty gritty between the Steam Deck versus Nintendo Switch argument, we could compare it to other. This isn't the first time that we're seeing a portable gaming handheld device. We've seen this done in at least in concept by other hardware developers such as Alienware before, and none of them has ever reached market. So that's why right now a lot of comparisons are between Steam Deck and the Nintendo Switch. But I think the more direct competition that Steam Deck will be having down the line would be these other portable PC devices, if ever they reach market though. So let's talk
well,
about these other portable PC gaming devices.
So to touch on it real quick, one of the first ones that comes to mind was announced in January 2020, which was the Alienware UFO. But that's only ever been a concept. We haven't heard of it in over a year now. One of the ones that is actually available, although I'm not sure if they're currently production units or if the only production units they had were the ones that they sent out for reviews for various media outlets. One of them is the Aya Neo, which runs similarly runs an AMD APU, but it runs the 4500U, which runs the older Vega GPU architecture. So it's not anywhere near it. It in theory is not as powerful as the Steam Deck. The Aya Neo has a similarly 800p display, 800p IPS display, and the performance of it in various games, as they claim on their website, they can get anywhere from 30 to 60 FPS, even on AAA games. Of course, the AAA games will be running at low or medium-low settings, maybe at 720p, but they claim that you can get anywhere from like 30 to 60 FPS depending on the game. And the main thing about that is the price point. The Aya Neo costs a whole lot more than even the most expensive version of the Steam Deck. Like, I think the base price for the Aya Neo is something around 750 USD, whereas that's like $100 over the most expensive version of the Steam Deck. I mean, the Aya Neo does come with 1 TB of SSD storage, but the hardware, like the actual APU inside of it, is just not as powerful. So it's kind of I don't know if it's completely that. I don't know if it's that fair of a comparison point. If it's really a direct competitor because of the pricing. The Steam Deck is just so much more competitively priced. And Valve even said that they were selling it at that price, even if it was painful to them. I think painful was the word that Gabe Newell used for it. So I assume that they're selling at a loss in terms of hardware, but they just make it all back in software and through their games distribution platform.
Yeah, in terms of leverage, Valve has a lot of leverage because this thing will run the Steam library, and so having something like this will actually benefit Valve in the long run because they get to sell more games on the Steam platform, and that's going to recoup the expenses that they've used for the production of this and for the research and development involved in this. And that's the kind of leverage that its competitors doesn't have. Alienware and the one you mentioned just now, the IO, don't really have their own gaming libraries that they can depend on in terms of revenue. So they will have to recoup the expenses of producing their handheld consoles from the hardware itself, because they really can't sell the games themselves from their own market. Or that, as far as I know, they don't have their own markets.
Yeah, that's probably why they have to sell at those price points, which brings us to comparison with the Nintendo Switch and the recently announced OLED Switch. And I feel like that's somewhere you can draw a comparison to.
And I believe, Carl, you actually wrote an article on Clutch Points regarding this comparison, right? So what do you have in mind, or what were your findings when you were comparing the Steam Deck to the Nintendo Switch?
Okay, so first of all, we have to address the current sentiments of the people about the Switch OLED, right? So leading up to E3, there was like so many swirling rumors about, Nintendo's gonna come out with a new Switch. It's gonna be 4K. It's gonna have so many hardware upgrades. But then right before E3, Nintendo like shuts it down. No, we're not announcing any hardware at E3, and they didn't. They announced a lot of games, which we already covered from a previous episode, but they didn't announce a new Switch. And then months later, here in July, they announced the Switch OLED. And the only difference from the current Switch is the OLED screen. So it's just a better screen, technically. If we compare it to the Steam Deck specs-wise, we can't... I mean, the competition really isn't there for the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is just really more powerful as a console. And besides, Switch was never about the power anyway. So to me, I feel like looking at the specs is just like not the most important thing we have to consider if we have to compare these two consoles, right? So the main thing really is like the gaming library. So like, for example, look at the old Sony PS Vita. So they came out with a really powerful handheld, but where were the games? There were like 5 to like a dozen good games that you'd get for that console. And even then, some of them were also available somewhere else. So the strength of the Switch really is the Nintendo first-party exclusive library. So you can't play Mario, Pokemon, Legend of Zelda, Animal Crossing, Fire Emblem. Games like that aren't available anywhere else. And they have a really, really loyal, long-time fan base. And it's not gonna be easy to convince them to like change sides just like that. People grew up with these games. So I think Valve's answer to that is just how big the Steam library is, right? There's like thousands upon thousands of games across every genre. And imagine playing, like, for me personally, I'm a huge fan of strategy games, right? These don't come out on console or handheld, like, ever. They're only like PC experiences. How can I play Total War Crusader Kings like outside? Then the only solution to that is like the new Steam Deck. But as of now, it's all like just promises from Valve. How are we gonna be sure that all these games are gonna work? They're already having trouble with like games like Destiny and Apex, right? So hopefully, if Valve's promises do like pan out, this will be kind of insane. Imagine playing so many games on handheld, especially if you're like a big Steam ecosystem person already. You already own so many games on Steam. Your pile of shame and backlog is huge. This will be like really huge when the pandemic ends and you have a commute. You can slowly work on your backlog while waiting to get home. So I feel like that's the kind of market the Steam Deck is tapping. People already on Steam who don't want to buy their games a second time just to play them on portable. I feel like people who have a lifestyle that really like requires them to travel a lot will also get a lot of mileage from this. I feel like it won't eat up too much of the Switch's core market. Like, people already loyal to Nintendo will not change. They will always be loyal to Nintendo unless Nintendo fucks up like majorly. So I feel like, yeah, the Steam Deck is about to make some waves in the handheld market, but they won't kill the Switch. What else? I feel like the other add-ons to the Steam Deck, like being able to run productivity software, because it's basically PC, right? Imagine if you don't have a laptop or a tablet and you can install like Microsoft Office or stuff like that on Steam Deck, it'll be like your all-in-one portable tech gadget. You don't need to bring anything else except maybe a keyboard, because it will be really shitty to type with the touchpad.
Actually, as someone who does bring a laptop to the cafe to write articles, I work as a gaming journalist, so I write a lot of articles per day, and sometimes I just want a quiet environment away from home. So sometimes I go to Starbucks and write articles there. But my current laptop, which is a work laptop, can't install games on it. So like, if I wanted to play in between games, I'd have to dish out my Nintendo Switch and play whatever I wanted there. But if I'm not particular with the games that I'm playing, if I just want to play third-party titles that aren't exclusive to the Switch, I'm really excited and quite attracted to the prospect of just bringing one device to the cafe and getting to work on it and play on it at the same time. It's not a problem for me to bring kind of like a monitor if ever if ever Starbucks allows me to set up a monitor on my table and plug it in and plug the Steam Deck there and write whatever article I have in mind for the day and just stay there in the cafe for the whole day. But at the same time, I'm not still sure if the Steam Deck would be capable of allowing people to write articles, or like if it's going to be conducive to writing just with the base console without an external keyboard. Getting the 512 gigabyte version gets you an exclusive keyboard theme, right? So I'm guessing Valve's really banking on the keyboard capabilities, the virtual keyboard capabilities of the Steam Deck or something like that. So they're also saying a lot of good things about its trackpad, which they say really simulates the mouse in terms of accuracy and precision. So I think that's a really good thing for people who wants to use the Steam Deck for productive stuff. But I'm still not sure if it's something that I can be doing with just the Steam Deck alone, or if I'm gonna have to whisk out a keyboard for it. But that's definitely a easier solution than bringing a Nintendo Switch and a laptop at the same time. Just a Steam Deck plus a keyboard, that's a better option than a laptop and a Nintendo Switch.
So my take on it is I'm a little bit in between whether or not I'd be interested in actually getting my hands on one, because, for example, looking at the vast library of games that we do have available on Steam, a lot of them they can't be played on just a controller setup. And considering the Steam Deck only has 4 extra buttons and 2 trackpads, which, yes, they do simulate the mouse, and we've seen the proof of concept on the Steam controller, and the trackpads are actually quite good. They were probably one of the first ones to do it, and then the PS4 did it, and then the Xbox did it. But yeah, like you'd have mouse input and you'd have button input, but I don't know if that would be enough for some games. Like, some games require to use a lot more of your keyboard to do that, and if you have to bring a keyboard around, is it really the same seamless portable experience that you'd be expecting? Because, like, if I was playing a game that needed a full keyboard and I was on the bus, because before the pandemic and you get stuck in traffic, my commute was like 6 hours going to the city, and I'd have to have a keyboard for some games that I've been planning on playing there. So, like, it kind of feels like it in some ways defeats the purpose of the portability, although I do see that it is definitely better than having a laptop, because there's no way a laptop could last that long on a commute, and there's no way you would have any way to properly use a laptop, especially for gaming, while you're on the commute. I just feel like maybe I'm definitely not the market for it. So it feels to me like it's in a pretty awkward place, because it's also not powerful enough to compete with actual gaming laptops or actual gaming consoles, but it is powerful enough to compete with the portable versions or any other kind of portable console out there, and it gives you access to your full library. So it does fill that nice niche in the market. Well, maybe it's not that much of a niche, actually, considering the number of people that play on the go, mobile gamers and all. It does fill the rest of the market that isn't loyal to Nintendo, as Cal mentioned earlier.
Yeah, for me, personally, I feel like the Steam Deck is a good thing. I'm really, really happy to see the current gen, both on the console space and the handheld space, have so much more competition than the previous one. Because the last series, the last gen was like full on consoles. It was all Sony, right? All PS4, and the handhelds were like all Nintendo. But this time, we're finally seeing a bit more competition happen. So I'm excited to see what innovations this will bring. Maybe this will inspire Nintendo to actually upgrade the Switch and release a new model with better hardware, please. And then, yeah, I'm really hyped to see where this will go. I'm kind of interested in a Steam Deck, but I'm not really sure if I'll like make be able to make the most out of it. I don't really play a lot on handheld, and the productivity stuff I already have covered. So yeah, I'm just more excited to see where this will bring the gaming as a whole. And also we have to talk about the casual third party market that we already talked about a bit earlier. So I feel like some aside from the super loyal Switch owners, right? There's a bunch of people who buy the Switch for casual reasons, like families that want to give their kids like some console to play on that they can bring during vacations or when they have to travel. And then they don't really have so much loyalty to exclusives, right? They just want a nice console that their kids can play on, or people who are looking at wanting to play third-party games on handheld. So perhaps the Steam Deck will take some people off the Switch. We'll see.
But I mean, that does also beg the question, because one of the markets that the niche has cornered is the fact that aside from it being a portable console, when you dock it, it turns into a party console, and we're unsure whether or not the Steam Deck has support for, like, can you connect a bunch of controllers to it and then play couch co-op games together, or will you all have to have your own separate Steam Decks? I mean, sure, you could play one person on a Steam Deck, one person on his laptop, another person on his PC, and all that stuff. You could even use Steam Remote Play together to do that, or Steam. There's a Steam streaming version of it, or you can play it on a tablet. But yeah, in terms of like the more casual audience, a lot of families also buy the Switch because you can play family games on it. You can play multiplayer games, even the non-first party ones. I'm not familiar with the non-first party ones. Like, I think about Mario Kart, I think about Mario Party. I guess there's like Overcooked, there's like Moving Out, available on PC, available on Steam, right? But yeah, it's like we don't know if the Steam Deck is capable of doing that. And overall, is it a Switch killer? No, not in the slightest, in the sense that I don't feel like they're attacking the exact same market. They have their own separate niches. But it is definitely Switch competition, which means that Nintendo is going to be forced to step their game up. And like Cal mentioned, this is good for all of us. Like, Nintendo's going to have to make moves to keep their Switch relevant to as wide of an audience as it had up until this point. Because now there's a new competitor in the handheld gaming space, and they don't dominate it enough so that they can just keep getting away with upgrading the screen or releasing some ports of games that were popular a few years ago on other consoles, and just releasing first-party game content all the time. They're gonna have to step it up because now there's real competition, and I'm hoping that Valve succeeds here, and I'm hoping Valve encourages other manufacturers. They've made their license for SteamOS free, so other manufacturers can produce their own handheld consoles, and I'm hoping that also picks up, because the more competitive this gets, the better everyone's gonna have to do overall. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on it.
And unlike these two heathens here, I'm actually a Nintendo fan. I'm very loyal to Nintendo titles. But I do agree with their sentiments that this is good for everyone. Nintendo has to step up. There has been a lot of buzz about the new Nintendo Switch, and Nintendo really under-delivered there. Like, Nintendo, come on, read the room. Everyone's expecting something big. And you had the Switch OLED in the pipeline. You could have used the feedback to, delay the announcement for the OLED a bit and add some more features to it. Then I don't think anyone's doing you're doing anyone favors with the release of the OLED. I don't think it's going to attract a larger fan base to your core demographic, and it's basically something that's almost dead in the market once the Steam Deck arrives and people give good feedback on the Steam Deck. It's not going to really kill the Switch like they said, but it's going to really hurt for Nintendo in terms of sales when OLED and Steam Deck comes head to head this holiday season. But yeah, those are our thoughts for the Steam Deck. We'd like to hear from you as well, so if you have your own thoughts for the Steam Deck and whether or not it's going to compete directly to the Switch, or if it's going to be the next Nintendo Switch killer, let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section on Facebook and YouTube. And that's going to be it for us for tonight. And this has been Newt.
This has been Q.
This has been Cal.
And this has been the Off Cooldown podcast. Thank you very much for listening in, and we hope to see you again next week for our next episode. So we'll see you guys next time. So stay frosty and Goodbye.